Question, who's growing tomatoes this year? Let's see. Whoa. Okay. Anybody growing tomatoes for the very first time, maybe? Or in the last couple of years? Okay, so there's some newbies. Generally, the first year or 2 years, if you never had a garden with tomatoes or any type of vegetable, you think you have the greenest thumb there is, because generally there are not any problems. Now, if you don't water, yes, it's going to be a problem, but with diseases or insects, generally the first couple of years, there's not a problem. And you're going, well, what's the big deal with this? Everybody's complaining about diseases and insects and all that. I don't see any of that. Give it a couple of years after that, and you're going to see the pests move in. So tomatoes are actually the most popular vegetable, even though botanically speaking, it is a fruit. So I was very interested that in the late 1800s, there was a ruling by a judge, and because vegetables were being taxed when they're imported into the United States. And so, botanically speaking, a tomato was a fruit. But most people thought that a fruit was something you ate as a sweet food at the end of your dinner. But a judge decided to overrule that, and it did. So this is one of the very few vegetables that actually had to go in front of a judge. Of course, they couldn't take a witness stand or anything. And so what happened is the judge said, because, look at this rain. It's just...
It's coming.
It's not just on your parade, it's our parade.
Yeah, but you're standing under the tree. I'm on the hill. So what happened, real quick, because the judge said no, a tomato is usually served with other foods that are vegetables at a dinner or a lunch. And so he overruled it, saying no. Maybe it's raining at the Ag Museum now. I guarantee you a block away, when we got this down, it wasn't raining. So I think it's moving maybe into Donaldson area. I can use that. Okay, back on some unusual tomato disorders. Expect to see what I would call cat facing and zippering, and that is due to low temperatures. And we had a lot of that in the low 50s. So expect to see that. If you see blossom end rot, calcium deficiency, not in the soil, and the ability of the plant to translocate calcium. And eventually that goes away. It takes tomatoes a little bit of time. So calcium is responsible for good cell wall construction in plants. And when there's not enough calcium, cell walls collapse, and it's not a disease, and you get that darkened area with a bloom end. That's where the flower end was, so they call it blossom end rot. So don't buy a blossom end rot spray, because it really doesn't do anything. Unless it's a mental thing, maybe. You feel like, at least I've done something. So it's, but calcium does not translocate through foliage very well. So you just wait it out. What you want to do is you do want to make sure that it's very critical that tomatoes get consistent watering, not overwatering. Now, many, many years ago, I remember when it got really dry, this one lady called me, and she'd been watering every day, and that's too much. And then it started raining, and she consistently kept watering. So what happened to her tomato plants? Growth cracks. So, and where do the growth cracks occur? You will get what we call radial. That radiates out from a central area, the stem end, because that's where the water is moved into the fruit. Or you'll get concentric rings. That's because the inside of the tomato is growing so fast, the skin cannot stretch quick enough. And it just splits a little. And generally, it's never an issue. You just cut that part out. Sometimes in the radial cracking, you may see a little white mold growing, but that doesn't penetrate. It's not a disease. So if you consistently water way too much, you're going to get what we call radial or concentric ring cracking in your fruit. So don't worry about that. Now, one issue you probably might see, and I've seen it in the heirloom Ag Museum garden over there, not with the tomatoes, but with the peppers. But tomatoes will have the same problem. They're getting some sun scald because we have had a lot of plants, if they don't have enough foliage, or if you've actually suckered the tomato plants and removed a lot of the potential new little branches and stems, that provides a lot of new foliage. And if you oversucker a tomato plant, you remove the ability of the plant to produce a lot of foliage to protect the fruit from the harmful, really, heat of the sun. So you might get what we call a sun scald. Now that's not going to hurt the fruit. It'll be mainly on the western side of the fruit. And even if you have a plant, I have some pepper plants, and in the Ag Museum garden, we're seeing there's one pepper, and it's got some sun scald on one side. And you know what direction? You can point it directly west where the sun is setting. So the western sun comes in. So you just cut that part out. That doesn't hurt the tomato. And it's also very common on pepper plants. Has anybody ever seen what we call vivipary? No, he said he just made a word up. No, it's a word. You can look it up. Google it right now. No. Vivipary is the in a plant the breakdown of a hormone and abscisic acid. And what abscisic acid does specifically in a tomato, and I've seen this about 4 times in my career. The first time was in the lab here many years ago, and 2 ladies brought in some tomatoes, and they cut them open. And they said, Mr. Cook, there's some little white worms inside this tomato plant. I said, well, usually I don't see that, but, you know, it's always first time for everything. So they show me the tomatoes, and I kind of grin a little. And I said, actually, those aren't worms. I said, those are tomatoes seeds that are germinating. Of course, they said, no way. I said, yeah, that's what they're doing. And I said, you can eat those. She said, you eat it. So actually I did. She had cut them open that day, so I took them home and ate. My wife wouldn't eat them either. She said, do those have worms in it? I said, no. I've gone this over already today with these 2 ladies. I said, those are tomato seeds that will germinate in a particularly overripe tomato. Now, when you cut open a tomato, you notice the seeds have a little jelly-like material around them. That's where abscisic acid is. And abscisic acid keeps seeds in a dormant state. But in an overripe tomato, now if you put a tomato that's almost ready to eat in a refrigerator, that will cause the abscisic acid to break down even quicker. And then you take it out. Of course, the tomato gets a really kind of a mealy, grainy texture to it, so don't ever put tomatoes in a refrigerator. If you do that, you might encourage those seeds to germinate. And so what do seeds like to germinate in? A dark, moist environment. That's the inside of a tomato. So I had a tomato 2 years ago do that too. And so I said, boy, I wish I could replicate this all the time. I would market this as a ripe tomato with little, what do you call it when you just start a little plant? With the sprouts, yeah. You got your whole salad right there. But my wife still wouldn't eat them. I said, you're eating with your eyes. Just close your eyes. They look too much like worms. So that is called vivipary. So if you see that, take a picture. And we can put it on our website. It's great. It makes a great picture. So tomato disorders, we don't really worry about them. They're not contagious like a disease. Now, there is a disease that's spreading right now. A couple of them you need to know about again. Early blight. And when tomatoes start producing fruit, you might see, and if you're growing tomatoes in the same spot year after year, you're going to see this. It will generally come in from the air. But if you grow tomatoes in the same spot every year, any of the old tomatoes or the foliage, mainly foliage that get what we call early blight. Those leaves will have spores in them. It will fall to the ground. And if you try to clean up everything, you'll never find all the spores. So next year you'll have early blight again. One that comes in a little bit earlier than early blight, believe it or not, is called septorial leaf spot. And these diseases are going to start at the bottom of the plant. So what you can do culturally without even spraying, pick off old yellow leaves because they're going to get old, and the old yellow leaves are the ones that get attacked first. Now, fungal diseases will always start at the bottom of the plant, right at the soil line, because that's where the fungal spores are. And in a rain like this, if it splashes the ground, if you grow tomatoes, it's good to have some type of a mulch, some kind of physical barrier there to prevent the splashing of the soils from a rain like this. See, this rain came basically straight down, and it splashes the soil up, and that soil is covered in fungal spores, and they land on the leaf, and that leaf is wet, and so that leaf is the growing media for the fungal spore, for the disease. So instead of growing in the soil, it's going to grow inside the leaf, and it gets all its nutrients from the tomato leaf. So you can culturally remove the old yellow leaves. Now, if you have a problem with, say, aphids later on, and they're notorious for spreading diseases, viral infections to all plants, and particularly tomato plants, your distorted leaves might look like they have herbicide injury. That's not going to be at the bottom. It's going to be at the top of the plant, because aphids like to feed on the new succular stems that are growing at the top. So if you need to spray like a sexidal soap, use some kind of organic spray for aphids, you're only going to spray the very top of the plant. And do it after the blooms. See, after around 10, 11 o'clock, that tomato plant, that blossom, if it hadn't been pollinated, by that time, it's not by the rest of the year. I mean, rest of that day. It's over. That plant will abort those flowers that so never got pollinated. So how does that flower get pollinated? You know what, one thing it needs? It has to have vibration on it. Either wind, but sometimes the wind is not strong enough. The anther, the male part of a tomato plant that produces pollen, those little slits in the anthers are so narrow that the pollen grains can't hardly get out. They have to be shaken. It's kind of like have a salt shaker and salt gets very humid. It sticks together. You turn the salt shaker over, nothing comes out, right? All the pollen grains are stuck together. So I actually have a little, plant vibrator is not the really. Okay, don't look at me that way. It does vibrate the blossom of the plant. It's a yellow, and it looks like a little bee face on it. And it has a battery in there, and the company has, AeroGarden sells these things. And it looks like a little bee. They have wings, and you hold it up to the flower, and if it's on a dry day, when you touch that flower, you cannot believe how much pollen explodes out of the anthers. It's like a little dust cloud. So that is useful for tomato plants. That's what I use it for. And that's what they're sold for. And I was your extension agent. You can believe everything I say. But I'm not your extension agent now, so you may not believe this stuff. But tomato plants, the blossom has to get vibrated, and mainly it's one insect that will do that, bumblebees. Bumblebees do it. So we do got to cherish those. You actually may see a carpenter bee may go, but really carpenter bees aren't going to go to tomato plants. Okay, now let's do something real quick. We're talking about, I have to look at my notes here. Why are tomatoes have certain colors to them? There's two factors that come into play that affect the color of a tomato. Now, a red tomato, it has to do with what we call the flesh, the interior part of the plant, of the fruit, and also the skin. So if you're really good at peeling tomatoes is kind of difficult, but if you could get a really good sharp knife and peel a tomato, it'd probably be difficult to see that that skin has a certain color to it even. It's usually going to be clear or a yellow. So if you have a red tomato or a tomato that's pink, it looks pink to our, or red to our eyes, it's because the interior is red or pink, but the skin is going to be yellow. Now, if you have a pink tomato, not a red one, but it's pink, it's going to have a clear skin, absolutely clear. Light passes right through it. What if you have a tomato that has what we call really dark shoulders, the ones that are black, brown, or purple, like Cherokee purple? You know what tomato fruit have that plants also have in them? A certain pigment? Chlorophyll. So chlorophyll has to actually break down in a tomato fruit. And that's why tomatoes are green. It's because of chlorophyll and other pigment colors, but mainly chlorophyll. So as the fruit matures, the chlorophyll actually breaks down and the tomato can change color. Now there's a condition called green shoulders, very unusual, that if a tomato fruit is exposed to a lot of sunlight because you've removed a lot of the suckers and removed a lot of the new foliage, and the sun is heating that tomato, but not enough to cause it to sun scald, you may have a condition where the chlorophyll continues to exist and doesn't break down, and the top of the fruit, the stem end of that fruit, will remain green and never ripen. Now, it doesn't hurt the tomato, you have to just cut that out. So that is a condition called green shoulders, and I've seen that happen every so often. Okay, one more thing about tomatoes. Let's look at, green tomatoes, when they're ripe green tomato, that just seems kind of weird. If you wait around and there has to be a good trick to somebody. Get somebody a tomato plant, heirloom, and when the tomato is ripe, it's going to still be green, and they're going to wait around until it gets red. And it's never going to turn red. And then they'll just start falling off. But no, that wouldn't be a good trick to somebody. Green tomatoes, there's two variations in green tomatoes. If you have a yellow, green colored, that's because of a yellow skin over green interior. But if you have a bright green tomato that's just die-hard green, it has to have a clear skin. So the color of a tomato will be affected by what we call the flesh inside and also the skin. The skin is either going to be either yellow or clear. So it's very interesting. Tomato is the most popular fruit/vegetable that we grow. Grow heirlooms. I still enjoy heirlooms because of the flavor. A lot of the tomatoes sold in stores are hybrids, and they've been developed to have really thick skin. They can fall off the trucks and they just bounce off the road. They don't even bruise. You could use them as tennis balls, play croquet with them, anything you want to do, but eat them. There's actually, if you blindfolded somebody and gave them a store-bought tomato and cut it up, and they would not have any idea what they're eating. They said, I have no idea what that is. You could make up anything. He said, you won't believe what you just put in your mouth. But it's because of shipping. They ship tomatoes from great distances. Now, I encourage everybody to go to the local farmer's market. Who has a little farmer's market? I live in Donaldson. We got a great farmer's market. I know on 12th Avenue, there's good farmer's market, and one in this neighborhood too, isn't there? Right down the road. Try to buy local. Support your local farmer. A lot of the local farmers are growing heirlooms that you're not going to find these in grocery stores unless you have a very unique grocery store. Because heirlooms don't ship very well. By the time that they're picked, they're just about ready to eat. So, grow tomatoes. Gives you some unusual disorders that may occur. Learn that you can still cut out that disorder and enjoy a tomato. Whether you call it a fruit or a vegetable, all that matters is that you like it. It's good to be back with everybody again. And thank you for that rain.